Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video, as always, finds you well and in good spirits wherever you are in the world, especially my friends, especially during these times. And I would like to continue with the Q&A videos. This time, I think by my count, we are at Q&A part 13. Okay, so I am at the video where I asked for questions, and I'm going to pick up where I left off. And so I am now at the question from our dear friend Jammez. So hello Jammez. And you say, hello Daisuke. As an Australian myself, I have recently decided to work my way through some highly regarded Aussie films, whether that be the exploitation films of the 70s, the independent films of the 90s, or more contemporary works. I'll be watching it. It would be lovely to hear some of your thoughts on Australian cinema, as well as a couple of your personal favorites. Okay, well, this is great. Thank you very much for the question. Now, while I haven't necessarily spoken on this channel about Australian cinema per se, I have had a number of occasions where I've spoken about some Australian films or co-Australian films, like co-Australian, co-British productions, so something like Walkabout, for example. I haven't spoken about it as well, but like Wake and Fright also comes to mind in that kind of genre. And I've also spoken on this channel about Picnic at Hanging Rock, for instance, so Peter Weir's film. And I would say also that, well, I guess if we're speaking of Peter Weir, there are some other great films like Last Wave or Gallipoli or The Plumber come to mind, as well as other films in his filmography. Of course, he has a very critically acclaimed filmography. But I would say, for me in particular, it's this period, maybe in the 70s, a very exciting, quite a unique period, and one that is still very fresh, and it captures a kind of essence, in my opinion, or number of essences that I think are quite brilliant. A lot has been mentioned, of course, of the cinema, say, of Bruce Beresford, for instance, or Philip Noyce, Newsfront, or Beresford's Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, or Tim Burstall, Alvin Purple, and let's see. Let's see here, The Devil's Playground, or The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith, so Fred Skipsey, and gosh, there's so many others. The sort of the Ocker films. I mean, I mentioned Alvin Purple and The Adventures of Barry Mackenzie, I suppose, but there's that movement as well. And so this is a very rich tapestry, I think, of this sort of cinema, in particular from the 70s. And so I'm kind of very much in awe of this period. Of course, there's more to this, but that would be maybe the example that I would cite. And I suppose I could say, and Mad Max, I suppose, also would come into that as well around the same time. So that would be generally what I would probably consider in terms of some examples of Australian cinema that I think is really exciting. I'd love to talk more about. But anyway, yeah, thank you very much for your question and comment, and please enjoy your journey through Australian cinema. And if you happen to come across some titles along the way that you want to share with us about, please feel free to let me know at any time. I'd love to hear more about it. So cheers, my dear friend. Thank you so much. Let's see. And here we go. So next is Ryan Chiasson. Please pardon me for my poor pronunciation. So Ryan, hello Daisuke. I was curious as to your thoughts on number one, Canadian cinema. example, Mon Oncle Antoine, the films of Denis Arcand, the National Film Board of Canada, the films of David Cronenberg. And 2, the work of Werner Herzog. Okay, so this is very interesting. So as to your first question, so Canadian cinema. This is also a topic that I haven't necessarily spoken about, but I do admire a number of not a number, but quite a large number of films from the cinema of Canada. You mentioned NFB, for example. So this is obviously a very sort of significant component of Canadian cinema, and especially Canadian cinema that has a very prominent, let's say, prominent meaning or purpose behind it, especially the documentary and animation fields, of course. Very, very famous, very, very renowned. There's also, you mentioned Arcand, so Denis Arcand, so what was that film? Jesus of Montreal, or Jésus de Montréal, and the Barbarian Invasions, I think, are really quite striking examples. Again, I haven't seen all of Arcand's work, and even with those works that I mentioned, I still haven't seen them enough times to be able to talk about them fully, but I think they're speaking to a lot of sort of concerns and issues there, as well as other filmmakers that come to mind would be people like Jean-Marc Vallée, or if we're talking about other filmmakers from Canada, Atom Egoyan, and Alan King, of course. Alan King comes to mind immediately, and Sarah Polley, and you mentioned also David Cronenberg, of course. So so this is, I think, a very exciting and quite moving and very important part of cinema, of course. So, but again, maybe one of these days I should try to talk more about some of these other filmmakers. And so, but thank you very much for the question. And let's see, then you mentioned, yes, the work of Werner Herzog. So, yeah, this is yet another gap in my YouTube activity, in the sense I've never been able to speak about the works of Werner Herzog. This is not to say that I don't know any of the works of Werner Herzog. So on the contrary, there was a period in my life where I was growing up in college, and I was watching nothing but Herzog works, and so that lasted for, I think, maybe a good few months of my young adult life. And so I was just watching and essentially devouring anything I could get my hands on. And I think I was pretty much, how should I put it, I was pretty much enamored and fascinated and in awe, Aguirre, Wrath of God, or Fitzcarraldo, or Nosferatu, his version of Nosferatu, or even Dwarf Started Small, and Wojciech and others, and this goes on, and so I think I'm just fascinated by his concerns and his eye and his attention to detail, but a kind of specific kind of detail, a detail of, I would almost call it the detail of the absurd, but in a very sort of, how should I put it, it's sort of an absurd, but it's an absurdity that is still within the realm of human possibility, let me put it that way. And so there is a really wonderful sense, and I mean this in a very complimentary way, a really beautiful lyrical sense of contradiction in his works, and there's a sense of fright and fear and the real darkness potential of the human condition, but also there is a real sense of ambition and drive and a kind of an innate quirkiness that is inherently human, but it calls attention to many aspects of life that otherwise would go unseen. And so I think there's that is my general sense of Herzog works. Of course, I'd love to go into more detail about them, and I actually have thought about going into more detail about Herzog's films here on this channel one of these days, hopefully. they've enjoyed some pretty interesting Blu-ray releases of late, of course, not of late, but in the recent years, and so it would be nice to try to get those films and talk about them. Well, not get those films because I actually have them, but to be able to talk about them here on this channel one of these days. But anyway, Ryan, thank you very much for your questions, and I hope you're well. So thank you very much. Let's see. Next is Dan Moden. So hello, Dan, and hello, Daisuke. I would like to know your thoughts on the release, The Emigrants, The New Land, in the Criterion Collection. As a Swede, there would be interesting to hear some thoughts about it. I think Max von Sydow or Sydow's performance in the movies is great. I agree. So thank you and well wishes from Sweden. Yes, I haven't spoken about this Criterion release, but it's The Emigrants in the New Land, and Jan Troell's works. They are grand and magnificent and intimate and poetic. They are very lyrical and also very sincere and earnest, and also very devastating, quite magnificent. And there are a number of similarities between the works, obviously, but there's some key differences as well. And so, without going into too much detail about them, because I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but I really admire them quite deeply, and each in their own specific ways, of course. But they can be seen obviously as companion pieces, but they can also be seen, it's also worth it to sort of consider them as their own separate beings, and they operate really, really well. And there's a really nice relationship that's going on between them. But again, maybe I can try to talk about these in a separate video one of these days. I would love the opportunity. I've never, so I'd love the opportunity to do that. And I agree with you about the performances. They're just absolutely stunning. So. But thank you very much for reminding me of this. This is something I really have to get to. So thank you very much, Dan. And I think you have another question, but I'll get to that in a second. Before that, let me go to the next question here, which is by Philip Thakuri, or Thakuri. So hello, Philip. And hi, Daisuke. Greetings from Seattle. Hello. My question is, what is your thoughts on Bong Joon-ho's films, especially my all-time favorite, Memories of Murder? Will you ever do a review live stream on the film? And lastly, how did you get your hands on the Blu-ray copy? Thank you, Daisuke. Oh, okay. So let me just be clear. I don't have the Blu-ray copy of Memories of Murder. I have the 2-disc DVD set. That's not set. It's the 2-disc DVD release. So it's not the Blu-ray. And so I think it's phenomenal. It's an absolutely phenomenal work, and I oh gosh, I would love to talk about that. I'm actually waiting for the Criterion release of that before I'll be able to talk more about that. So I will talk about it, I promise. But when the Criterion release comes, that'll be the best opportunity for me to do so, because yes, it is. I understand it will be coming to Criterion. I don't know when, but it should be coming. So when that happens, then that'll give me the opportunity to talk more about it in a little bit more detail, because I think it's really worth it. And Bong Joon-ho, yes. So as I said in a previous Q&A, maybe over the course of the past year or so, I have been going through and trying to fill in the gaps of my own South Korean cinema, lack of film knowledge and about South Korean cinema, and I've gone over the terrain of the works of Bong Joon-ho. I think his filmography is absolutely fascinating, and there are many types of genres that are woven in and worked on with such grace and aplomb, and a real sincere sort of artistic dexterity to them, and there's always something going on, and there's always something under the surface, which is really and there's a sort of off-kilter balance, off-balance thing, which I think is absolutely excellent. So, and his works, I think, are quite stunning. Mother, or Okja, or Snowpiercer, etc. So, and there are others, of course. and I'm quite taken with them, and I'm watching them as much as possible now, in the hopes that maybe I can try to talk a little bit about them on this channel one day. I can't promise anything, but I'd love the opportunity to be able to. And I guess also it would be wonderful one day to be able to talk, I suppose, not I suppose, but definitely it would be such an honor to be able to talk one day about Parasite. This is quite the film, and I'm quite taken with it. I was able to watch it a number of times on Blu-ray, and of course there's news that it will join the Criterion Collection hopefully very soon. And when that day comes, maybe that'll give me the opportunity to speak about it. Again, I did think about doing a live stream about that particular film, because I know it's one that's a lot of people have seen, and also a lot of people have a lot to say about it. And so I think it might be interesting. Again, I can't promise anything, but one of these days it might be a very worthwhile thing to do indeed on this channel, to talk about Parasite in a live stream or whatever form in the future. My Korean pronunciation is quite poor, but what was it? So it's Jessica Wittokdal, Illinois, Chicago. Gwanadon Kimjimo Gwenenisachom. Ding dong. So I think one of these days I'd love to be able to talk about that moment, and also many other moments in that film. But anyway, yes, so thank you very much for your comment, and I hope you're well. And yes, it's not the Blu-ray, it's the DVD set that I have. I would love to have the Blu-ray, but as you may know, it's very, very hard to get. So, and also the Criterion version is coming. So, and I'm okay with the DVD set that I have. So, anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you're well. Let's see. Next is Dan Moden, and you say, my second question is if you have seen any movie by Swedish director Roy Andersson. I think his movies would be great future Criterion releases. So yes, I have. So there is you know this already, but there is a sequence of films called the Living Trilogy, and in fact those three films are actually are made available on Japanese DVD, and actually there's also a Blu-ray set of the trilogy, which is actually now quite hard to come by. So I don't have the Blu-rays, but I have the individual DVDs in Japan, and these are what do you call it? Songs from the Second Floor, and You the Living, and A Pigeon Sat on the Bench Reflecting on Existence. And as you know, these are quite they have really display a really unique voice. A very, very unique voice in terms of presentation of information, how characters connect or don't connect, the way in which we have many or certain characters, or the way in which there's a sort of meditative ordinariness or something, or the way that humor is employed. And I mean, I use the word ordinaries, but I think there's a lot more than that, and there's a sort of meditation on life aspect that is going on, and I find it to be really a unique view, a cinematic viewpoint. And once again, I haven't had the opportunity to really watch and rewatch them, but I must say that they are quite evidently of a sort of singular voice, cinematic voice, and quite fascinating. Once again, so this is, I haven't seen any of the works by Andersson, but the works that I have seen are of what's known as the Living Trilogy. So it's Songs from the Second Floor, and the English titles anyway, Songs from the Second Floor, You the Living, and A Pigeon Sat on the Bench Reflecting on Existence. And so I think those, and again, I don't know what their release history is outside of Japan, but I do know that they are available on Japanese DVD, and if one looks hard enough, I'm sure one can also find the Japanese Blu-ray releases of them as well in a nice box set. I wish I had that Blu-ray release, but anyway, thank you very much. And maybe one of these days I should try to talk more about his works. I wouldn't call myself an expert, and I think, I think also. I think I need to watch them more and more to be able to speak with any sort of half semblance of confidence. But I do know of them, so and they are actually available here in Japan if one looks hard enough. They are available here in Japan to watch on Japanese releases. So that is very good news for me. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope you're well. Thank you very much for your questions. Next, we have our dear friend LJLJ, who says, couldn't resist asking you another question. Ask if you are planning to get the Second Sight Dawn of the Dead upcoming release, and if so, would you make a video for it? Like you, I am a Romero fan, in particular his Dead series. Have you thought of covering Romero's films in a series? Apologize for the second post, my friend. Hoping you and your family are well and stay safe. Oh, so thank you very much for this second question, or set of questions, my friend. Thank you. And so, yes, so I owe a lot to the films of George Romero, as I've mentioned before, and his films have given me so much happiness and scares and thrills, and in particular his Dead films, and for me in particular it's the first three films, Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, and Day of the Dead. I know the other films, of course, Land of the Dead, etc., Die of the Dead, etc., but for me it's those three films, and I'd love the opportunity one day to talk more about those films. I've spoken about Night of the Living Dead on this channel in a live stream, I think, but it was a live stream. Yes, it was a live stream, but not Dawn of the Dead or Day of the Dead. I would love the opportunity to talk about one or more of those films. And Dawn of the Dead 2, I think that would be so wonderful. And maybe, I always thought it would be really cool to try to do a video on each of the different versions of Dawn of the Dead that are made available. In that wonderful classic DVD Anchor Bay set with the comic book. For those of you who have it, I have it on the shelf somewhere, but for those of you who have it, you know it had the comic book as well, the little comic book in there, and I thought that was really great. But yes, so I have thought about it, and I love the opportunity one day to be able to talk about it, but as far as I did hear the news about that Second Sight release. I admit I haven't necessarily been keeping up with the most recent Blu-ray release news lately because of my mind has sort of been preoccupied with current events and the like, and so I haven't necessarily been keeping up with everything. So I don't know what the situation is as far as it's being released yet, or but if it does come out, I'm certainly game for it. I'm actually of the view that I have the DVD set, and so that's always served me very, very well. I've always relied upon that, and it's been a guide for me for the longest time. I got it many years ago, and it's been with me ever since. It's one of my prized DVD possessions, and so of course I'd love to see a great Blu-ray release of it one day. With all the different versions and that sort of thing, so I'm always game for that. But I'll always have those DVDs, and so I feel happy with that. But again, I look forward to the new release, of course, and see what it ends up being like. So anyway, yes, thank you very much, my dear friend, and I hope you are well. Great questions, thank you. And let's see, next is Andrew Conger, and you say, hello Daisuke, I asked a few questions before that you answered in Q&A part 2, I believe. Thank you for your answers, by the way. But since you're still doing the Q&A videos, I hope you don't mind me adding another question on here. No, not at all. Thank you very much. I was wondering if you had some favorite LGBTQ plus movies that you enjoy. I know I'm very fond of Call Me By Your Name, Tangerine, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and Moonlight, and wanted to hopefully get some more recommendations from you. P.S. I love that you're going through and answering everyone's questions. It really shows how much you care about this community. So thank you very much for your second set of questions, and also for your P.S. note. That's very kind of you. Once again, it's nothing that I do. It's everything to do with you and everyone else here. So I'm just very fortunate to be able to meet people like you who continue to inspire me and to keep the conversations going. So thank you very much to you, my dear friend Andrew. It's all thanks to you. So as to your question, I suppose I could mention the one that comes immediately to mind, because it's one that I've spoken about recently here on this channel, but I'm not sure if you have Criterion interest in the Criterion collection, etc. But if you do, there is the great recent release by the Criterion collection of the film Paris is Burning, sort of documentary, Paris is Burning. And I think it's really such a fantastically living documentary. It feels so fresh and alive, and it's of a world. It's sort of a time capsule film of a world that once existed but no longer exists, and all that. There are so many rich details about it, and not only that, there are so many details about the production and the background and these larger than life people who appeared in this documentary that are real people, real living, breathing people, flesh and blood people. And we get to learn about them and about their concerns and their interests and what it is they are striving for and aiming for in their lives in this particular time and place in New York. And so I strongly recommend that if you haven't seen it. So Paris is Burning, and it is a great Criterion release, and I think it's a kind of it's a wonder of a work, and if you haven't seen it, I would strongly suggest it, very much so. And yeah, so anyway, thank you very much for your second question and also for your P.S. note. I really appreciate it, and I hope you're well, my friend. So thank you, and let's talk some more. And let's see, and we are at what my screen is the last of the questions. Let's see. This is You're Finally Home, and you say, "Hello, Daisuke, my friend. If I'm too late to place in a question, I totally understand. But just in case I'm able to have one answer it, I'd like to ask, what is the most or otherwise a particular moment you recall where you have laughed the hardest at a scene in a movie? I think the hardest I have ever laughed is at the car chase sequence in The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad. Every time I watch that scene, I'm always on the floor laughing. Thank you, and hope you're staying safe." So thank you very much. You're finally home. And you mentioned The Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad. So I guess, what should I say? Right, please disperse. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. The Naked Gun. That's such a funny movie. Let's see. As far as other laugh out loud moments, I suppose I could mention a couple. Maybe the first one would be Clue. The film Clue. I love that film, and every time I watch it, I laugh so hard every time I watch that one. That's such a funny one. I don't want to talk too much about it, but there's because I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it. But there's some great Eileen Brennan and Madeline Kahn, of course, and Tim Curry. Oh my goodness! Talk about a performance. That is a performance for the ages. Tim Curry is an actor who's given us so many iconic performances. It's just unbelievable. And his Wadsworth the butler Fantastic, absolutely fantastic. Anyway, so that's one example of a sort of laugh out loud film. Perhaps the other would be, it's not a film, but it's more of a, well, I guess it is a work, or a collection of works or episodic works. And it's the series of Fishing with John. And I love that series. I love Fishing with John. I would love the opportunity to talk on this channel about Fishing with John, maybe a video for each episode of Fishing with John. And that is one that, again, I don't want to talk too much about it because I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it. If you haven't seen Fishing with John, let me just say that if you are feeling blue or down, or let me just rephrase it, whenever I feel blue or down, or just under the weather, or just down and out, for whatever reason, I will play Fishing with John. You know, it's on an older DVD from the Criterion Collection, but I will play Fishing with John, and all of my troubles go away because I am laughing from the very get-go. It is such a phenomenally sort of almost, it's so, in many ways it's so deep. It's so deep, and at the same time it's just so ludicrous, and that is the best combination. Some of the best acting as well, and some of the great portrayals, and some of the conversations, and great narration too. But again, I don't want to say too much about it. If you haven't seen Fishing with John, there are episodes, so you can just watch a couple episodes, which aren't very long in and of themselves. So if you like one episode, then I think you should watch the whole thing. But they are all so different and very quirky, because they have different guests on, and so. But that's all I'll say. But that's one that I cherish so much. It makes me laugh. It makes me feel very happy, and I'm always happy to be able to play that whenever I feel down, because it helps me to forget my troubles. So Fishing with John and Clue. So I think those would be two examples. But I like your example as well, You're Finally Home, which is that Naked Gun from the Files of Police Squad. So that is You're Finally Home. So thank you very much for your great questions. So thank you, and I hope you are well. So cheers, my friend. Cheers. Okay, so you might be noticing that the lighting and the positioning of the camera is a little bit different now, and so I should let you know that I was making the video, the Q&A video that you've just seen, and it was around, I do them rather late in the day, my time, and so around midnight or 1 a.m. I was just making that video and just recording it, and after it was over, it was rather late, and so I decided to go to sleep. And then the next morning, which is now, I wake up and I was just editing the video together and just making sure that it was okay, and I'm about to upload it, where I then discover that there are some additional questions to the Q&A, and so I think they were added just around the time that I was finishing editing. And so rather than wait for another Q&A video, I'll just go on with these videos now, and or this video now, and just continue with the Q&A, if that's okay, and just take these questions now and try to give them my best responses. So again, sorry for the difference in lighting, but I hope you can understand. And also thank you very much for these last minute questions. That's really great. So the first of which is Oliver Gruner. And Oliver, so hi Daisuke, and you say you have two questions. So number one, when it comes to foreign films, especially within the Criterion Collection, when you have to watch the film with subtitles, what is your overall experience in terms of the transfer of emotions from the actor onto you when you do not know what they say except by reading the subtitles? I think there is, or at least there can be, a huge gap between the emotions carried by the voice of the actor and what the subtitle says. What do you think about that? Yes, so I actually I agree with you in that there is a potential for there to be a great gap in terms of what of what one's own experience is as a viewer, and also what the language and what the expressions of a particular moment in the film, or the actor, or the performance, or other sort of maybe some kind of detail that is very specific to that particular cultural or geographical context that I don't necessarily get because of my lack of experience or lack of understanding in terms of that particular part of the world, and that sort of thing. So yes, I do think these gaps arise. They do exist within vis-a-vis language, as you suggest, but also they also exist in other forms, as I try to, certain allusions to a culture or history that maybe aren't necessarily fully explained, because they would be understood by people who understood them, but not necessarily understood by those who did not. And I understand to a certain extent the reverse of this, of course, in terms of certain, let's say, Japanese films. And I'm not a Japanese film expert, but I do understand certain details of watching a Japanese film that I can recognize based on my own living experience here, that I could also understand might not necessarily be caught by people living outside of Japan. And that's those are just little fine details, and also little nuances of language, etc. And I notice there's a little bit of a difference in terms of what is actually being said by an actor or a character, and what is actually being translated under the subtitle. And so I appreciate this particular issue that you bring up, and I suppose it's just a matter of appreciating, on the part of the viewer. So myself, if I'm watching a film that I admit that I don't have the fullness of life experience necessarily to fully understand every aspect of the context or the characters that are being part of the film that I'm watching. And that's true for, I think, so many films that I watch. I watch so many films, and I've never been to that particular part of the world, for example, or I don't speak the language, for example. And so there are many things that I don't get. So it's always a matter, therefore, of just trying to rely on one thing that comes up is, of course, there are always different presentations of a film from different labels, and also, therefore, different subtitling oftentimes. And so differences in subtitling between a film that is released in one label versus a film that's released in another label can also be a very interesting exercise, sort of side-by-side comparison. So for someone like myself who doesn't know exactly the particular language, you can still kind of get not a full sense, I appreciate, but there's a little bit of an interesting analysis that one can perform to a certain degree. If you see differences in subtitling of the same film, then that might give you a sense of this particular part of the language having a fuller richness than subtitling might immediately suggest. So that's one way I think that one could approach that. And then another way, of course, is just working with the supplements and seeing exactly if there's anything at all that can help someone in a position like myself who's watching a film and not necessarily understanding everything, just to see if there's something that can be found in those. Oftentimes maybe not, and as you say, maybe there are certain bits of language or culture that will just sort of go unnoticed unless a viewer is well versed in that particular part of the world or society or culture. And so those things are just bound to happen, and it's just a matter of just trying to do one's best, I suppose, as a viewer, given the resources that are available to one in the language that one understands. And that also Well, I was going to say something else, but let me just leave it at that. So I think that is just a general approach, but even if there is a huge gap, we also have to rely our best on looking at other aspects of the performance that we can also appreciate, certain gestures, facial expressions, and maybe even changes in the tone of the voice. These sorts of things can all, and gestures as well. These sorts of things can also be a part of the communication process of a particular actor's performance. So I think that is where my general position on that. So it's just, I guess, a viewer like myself will have to do one's best with the materials that are available to me. But a great question, and it's one of the interesting sort of issues of watching a film that is not in that is from a part of the world, or that is in a language that is not necessarily directly part of one's own direct experience. So it's a really fascinating topic. So, and then number 2, what is your favorite whodunit movie? Oh, great! I love whodunits, and there are many. I'm a particular fan of Agatha Christie. And so Agatha Christie films, I think, are really quite marvelous, or films that are based on Agatha Christie works, I think, are really quite marvelous. And so I'm a big fan of films like, let's see, I'm a big fan of films like Murder on the Orient Express, Death on the Nile, and it's gosh, what else? Also, it's not a film, but the BBC series, Miss Marple series, starring Joan Hickson. I'm a really big fan of that. I love that series, the Joan Hickson Miss Marple. And also, it's not BBC, but it's also British television, which is Agatha Christie's Poirot, David Suchet's Agatha Christie's Poirot. If you know the Agatha Christie David Suchet Poirot series, then my favorite of the bunch has to be something like Five Little Pigs. That has never been adapted to film as far as I recall, but that adaptation, David Suchet's Poirot, is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So Five Little Pigs, that's the name of the TV adaptation. It's kind of a TV movie. So Five Little Pigs, there are many others, but that's one of my favorites. So thank you so much for your great question, Oliver, and I hope you're well, my friend. Thank you. And let's see, there is another question, which is hand-embroidered lemon peel. So hello, hand-embroidered lemon peel. So I hope you're doing well. Thank you very much for the question. And you say, "Hi Daisuke, warmest tidings to you and your family. Do you have a scene which you return to time and time again, which acts as a cinematic nourishment for you?" For me, it is the sequence in The Night is Young, in which Alex bounds down to the street to Modern Love. I would like to go into the background of when I discovered this film, how much it has been my pleasure to share it with others, the cinematic techniques employed and context within the film, which I think make it so good. But suffice it to say, for time's sake, I visit it in victory and defeat, and it never fails to fill me up with a sense of hope. I look forward to your answer. Keep up the impressive work. Your friend, Jacob. Oh, that is a really well-worded comment, so thank you very much. I like how you put it. A scene which acts as cinematic nourishment. That is a very great way of putting it. And you talk about The Night is Young, and you say, I visit it in victory and defeat, and it never fails to fill me up with a sense of hope. That's a very interesting way of describing it, Jacob. So thank you so much for this. I'm now sitting here and I'm just pondering your question, and it's pretty difficult because there are so many. I think I did speak about a similar question in a past Q&A, but if I could address your question here in terms of films that I return to as acting as cinematic nourishment, I think there are many ways to interpret this meaning. And I would say, let me give two examples, and they interpret the phrase cinematic nourishment in different ways, and I'll try to explain. So the first way is, I think, as you describe it, or which is something that I think is similar to how you're describing it. Actually, no, let me take that back. I don't want to make any assumptions necessarily. But what I will say is the way that I can interpret cinematic nourishment. One way is it's sort of the way in which the film operates and how the viewer interacts with the film vis-a-vis the film and what it's presenting and the world that it's presenting and the mise en scène and the editing and the cinematic poetry that is at work and how that affects us as viewers. And so there are many examples of this, but I would say maybe the one that comes to mind as an example fresh in my mind right now is maybe Seven Samurai, Kurosawa's Seven Samurai. There is something of a triumphant tragedy and also a sort of a great fulfilling, almost rousing nature to that work that never fails to lift me up, even with its kind of complexity of character development. And I think, and there's a certain detail in terms of strategy and the sort of conflict that is at play at the center of the narrative of that film. But that film never fails to inspire me and sort of lift my spirits in a sort of a soaring sort of way. So, but that's me reacting, I guess, vis-a-vis the film. And I guess another way I could interpret your great phrase, cinematic nourishment, is also what the film reminds me of, and how the film, maybe it's not necessarily speaking to me, well, not speaking, but maybe I'm not getting nourishment per se from the way that the film is inspiring me through its cinematic technique per se, but maybe it's something that it reminds me of a particular memory that I associate with the film. And from there, I can get nourishment because the film is helping me to remember something from my past, or some memory is being jogged. And so in that way of interpreting the phrase cinematic nourishment, I can probably say another film that is very deep rooted in my own cinematic journey in my heart is something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And this is the Sergio Leone Western. I mean, it's a fantastic work. I find it to be so entertaining and so rich and deep and a wide expanse. Epic is the word that's often used to describe it, and but there's also something of a real cool machismo element that is also tempered with some great moments of humor, some real dark humor in places, and some really well set up action set pieces that are just also punctuated with a wonderful sort of sheen and shine and gracefulness by the music, of course, the Morricone music, and everything about that film is just a delight. Very, very funny film, very wild in places. So one of these days, maybe I can talk about The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But the reason why I bring it up in the context of your great question, Jacob, is if you're asking me about cinematic nourishment, and that's a film that gives me certain cinematic nourishment in the sense that it reminds me of particular memories that I have. And the memories that I have are of my parents and my father in particular, because he loved westerns. He is deceased now, and he passed away some years ago, and so and my mother too, unfortunately, and so I have no opportunity anymore to be able to communicate or talk with them. So I only have my memories to rely upon. And so one of the ways I can rely upon my memories of them is through their love of movies. And in particular, my father really loved The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He loved that film. And I just have fond memories growing up as a kid. I remember him in the kitchen or something, and suddenly he would be walking in, and I don't know, gosh, I don't remember what the exact context was. I don't remember what the conversations was. I must have been, I don't know, 6 or 7 or something. I don't know, but I was a kid, and it was a long, and suddenly he would just come in, and he'd just go like, wah, wah, wah. And, to wah, 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 he would just do the theme song. And that would be sort of his way of just of expressing his own delight with the film, and even then, I think at the time I remember I didn't see the film because I was a young kid, but I think I found the film soon after, I think, and my father showed it to me, because he loved it, and so I watched it, and I really grew to love it because of his love of the film as well. So I was quite taken with it, and it was a really lovely thing to be able to sort of share that and sort of share that with him, because it was something that obviously he loved very much. And I have similar films like that with, for instance, my own mother as well, because she really loved certain films as well. She was a really big fan of Sean Connery. She loved Sean Connery. She just was so smitten with Sean Connery, and every Sean Connery film that came out, she would just go to. She was such a fan of Sean Connery, and so I have this great affection for Sean Connery films, and whenever I see a Sean Connery film, it sort of, regardless of the actual subject matter of the film, because sometimes a Sean Connery film can be quite dark in terms of subject matter, as you may know, but they're really quite complex, and so they're not necessarily maybe on the terms that of the film itself. Maybe they're not necessarily on the same line as, say, Nourishment per se. They're still great works, but they might not necessarily be seen as nourishment per se. But for me, they are also a kind of sense of nourishment, because they do remind me of how my mother really enjoyed and loved Sean Connery's films, very much so. And so even now, I think of Sean Connery's films, and I think of my mother. And then I think of westerns and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. I think of my father. I mean, I don't mention this too often, and I mentioned maybe a couple times, but I don't want to bring it up too many times, and I don't bring it up in order to get any sympathy from anyone, because that's not the point of why I'm bringing it up. So please don't feel a need to send me any messages of sympathy or anything like that. I'm appreciative of that, but I'm okay with this. But I think let me just bring it up because my father unfortunately passed away at a very he passed away much too soon. And my mother, in fact, died as well a year before my father passed away. And so it was a very sad time. And it was actually a very sad time for my father as well, because his mother, my grandmother, also died around the same time. So it was and my father passed away, unfortunately, because he succumbed to cancer. And so, and my mother, unfortunately, when my father was diagnosed with his cancer diagnosis, and it was very serious by the time it was discovered, up to the point where it was very, very serious. And unfortunately, after a couple of years, it was something that he succumbed to, unfortunately. But when my parents received my father's diagnosis, it was a little bit of a shock to my mother, unfortunately. It was quite a shock to my mother, unfortunately, and I think it was something that she really was very affected by, because I think she and my mother and my father were very, very close, and they were sort of enjoying the early years of retirement, and so they were enjoying their retirement. They were just supposed to really have the rest of the years of their lives together and just enjoy it, and they were going to have to make all these plans and stuff, but they unfortunately were faced with this situation, and my mother was very, very affected by it, unfortunately, and she became very, very sick, and so we tried to help her out as best as we could, but it was too much, and unfortunately she took her own life, which was very, very sad, and it was particularly difficult, I think, for my father, because, as I say, at the time he was battling his own health issues, and he was very strong. He really fought very hard, and but unfortunately, he was hit with this really terrible news. My mother, again, it was something that I think was very overwhelming for her, and it's just the circumstances were such, therefore, that it wasn't. It was difficult for me at the very end to be able to connect with them as much as I would have liked to. It wasn't a, how should I put it, the relationship with my parents, I'm very grateful to them, but, like with any relationship, it wasn't necessarily perfect, and there were ups and there were downs, and so there were many moments where I think there were some downs, and how should I put it, especially during the end, there were some times where I wish we could have connected a little bit more. But unfortunately, due to circumstances, and I don't want to get into too many details now, but unfortunately, due to certain circumstances, it was such that I was unable to connect with them during those final years as much as I would have liked to. And then the circumstances were such that it became, unfortunately, a very sad situation. And so, I think back on those times. And it's always very important, I think, to keep those sorts of moments very, very clear in one's head. And that's why I'm mentioning it here, which is that, I consider cinema, therefore, to be a very important tool or a very important thing in my life. It provides sustenance in many ways, nourishment in many ways. And it helps me also to give me memories of things that I would otherwise not necessarily have any recollection of had I not seen the film, or had I not had those connections. It's like a photograph. It's like when you see a photograph of your past, and you see family members or your friends who are no longer with you. For whatever reason, right? You see these photographs, and there are some things that you recall and recollect. Are they happier times? Hopefully. Are they maybe distant times? Perhaps. But whatever the case may be, they are memories, and these sorts of experiences, I think, are very, very important to relive and to recall, especially when we consider there are ups in life and there are downs in life. And so, again, I bring this up, again, not for any kind of sympathy. But I do bring it up because, for my own personal experience, there are certain realities that have been part of my own life and the people around me. And so even in that context, I find that cinema helps me feel nourished, in the sense that it helps me to be reminded of certain memories that I have of a time that is no longer here, but still they are alive. And I'm sure cinema has that kind of effect for all of us in our own particular individual ways. And I would like to think also that the idea of nourishment, cinematic nourishment, is or can be that the meaning of that phrase can also be in the way that I'm describing it, in one of these two ways, either through the actual work itself or in the way that the work reminds you of something from your past or from your own memories. I really believe that is such an important thing. Of course, this is true for any other work of art or literature or music. That is true. So it's not necessarily a singular, exclusive thing to cinema only. Of course, I understand that. But there is, for me, a very personal engagement that I'd like to think that I try to have with every work that I encounter. And if anything, I always try to associate, or not try, but memories or moments become associated with a film, and I just become I become very much attached to them. And so, so that's how I would interpret this phrase, cinematic nourishment, in the context of my own personal experience. And when you say, I visit the film you mentioned, I visit in victory and defeat, and it never fails to fill me up with a sense of hope, I would say I agree. And I would also say, I visit these films in victory and defeat, and they never fail to fill me with a sense of hope, or at the very least, they never fail to fill me with a sense of the memories that I have of certain times that are no longer here, but that will always sort of survive, or that will always linger, and that will always be there as long as the memories are there. And as long as the films are there, then the memories will be there. So I think that's how I would I think that's how I would answer that question. Again, two parts, I suppose, but really great question. So thank you very much. I'm so glad I was able to catch it in time before I uploaded the video. So anyway, thank you very much, Jacob and Oliver. Thank you also for your follow-up questions. And I think, let me refresh one more time. I'm going to refresh the page to see if there are any more questions there. And so with that, I see that, oh gosh, okay, so that's it. So that is the end as far as I can tell. So thank you so much. If there are other questions along the way, I will try to make a future Q&A video. Again, I'm very humbled by this. I wasn't necessarily expecting this kind of response. I don't think I'm that interesting a guy, so so I wasn't expecting the questions to come in like this. So I'm very flattered. I'm very, very flattered and very touched and moved that you would take the time to send me these questions and just express an interest in who I am. So thank you so much for that. And really, really great. I learn from you constantly, all the time. So you are my teachers and my inspirations and my dear, dear friends. My dear friends, thank you so much as always. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So thank you so much again, my dear friends, and cheers.